There is a version of the story that is easy to believe. It says Prince Harry and Prince William had one terrible fight, one interview, one book, one betrayal too many, and if only one of them picked up the phone, if only one of them apologized, if only one private meeting finally happened behind palace doors, then maybe the two brothers could go back to being what people remember them as: Diana's boys, walking side by side, protecting each other from a world that watched them grow up. But that version is comforting because it is simple, and this story is not simple. The real tragedy of Harry and William is not that they had one argument and never recovered. It is that for years, they seem to have been living inside two completely different memories of the same family. For William, the monarchy was not just a family business. It was the structure he was born to inherit. It was duty, stability, sacrifice, and a future that had been mapped out for him before he could understand what any of those words meant. For Harry, that same structure increasingly looked like a machine that took from him, exposed him, ranked him, and then expected gratitude in return. And when two brothers disagree about an event, they can sometimes talk. But when two brothers disagree about the meaning of their entire lives, the problem becomes much harder. Because then, every conversation is not just about what happened. It is about who was hurt first, who was abandoned, who was loyal, and who has the right to tell the story. That is why every new headline about Harry and William feels familiar. A visit to the United Kingdom, a reported private meeting with King Charles, Meghan and the children not coming because of security concerns, William reportedly unwilling, or at least not eager, to sit down with his brother face to face. The details change, but the pattern does not. And that pattern did not begin with Oprah. It did not begin with Spare. It did not even begin with Megxit. It began earlier, in small moments that looked like gossip at the time, but now look like warning signs. And if we want to understand why Harry and William may never truly reconcile, we have to stop looking for the one moment that broke them. We have to follow the slow accumulation of moments that made reconciliation feel less and less possible. Because this is not just a royal feud. It is a story about siblings, about two people who knew the same parents, lived in the same palaces, stood behind the same coffin, and still came out of that shared life with different wounds. And if you have ever had a complicated relationship with a brother or a sister, you already know the most painful part. Sometimes the person who should understand your pain better than anyone becomes the person who understands it least. Before Meghan, before the interviews, before the lawsuits and memoirs and carefully worded palace statements, Harry and William were often presented as a unit. The public saw them as the two sons of Princess Diana, bonded by a childhood no one else could fully understand. They were boys who lost their mother in front of the entire world. They were young men who turned grief into public duty. They laughed together, served together, appeared together, and seemed to carry the memory of Diana together. That image was powerful because people needed it to be true. The brothers were not just royal figures, they were emotional symbols. If William and Harry were close, then maybe something had survived Diana's death intact. Maybe the monarchy, for all its coldness, had still produced one human bond the public could believe in. But even in the old version of the story, their roles were never equal. William was the heir. Every choice around him was shaped by the fact that one day he would be king. His privacy mattered, but his preparation mattered more. His emotions mattered, but his composure mattered more. From childhood, he was not just William, he was the future of the institution. Harry was the spare. That word sounds almost old-fashioned, but it shaped the emotional architecture of his life. It meant he was essential until he was not. Close to the throne, but not central to it. Protected by the institution, but also used by it. Loved as a son and brother, but never carrying the same purpose that defined William's path. That difference matters because it created two very different survival strategies. William learned to endure by identifying with the system. If the monarchy demanded silence, he learned silence. If it demanded discipline, he learned discipline. If it demanded that private pain be absorbed for the sake of the bigger picture, he understood that as the price of the role. Harry learned to endure by questioning the system. He often seemed more impulsive, more emotional, more openly angry at the press, more willing to say that the rules themselves were part of the harm. And the older he got, the more he seemed to see royal life not as a duty to master, but as a trap to escape. Neither of those responses is hard to understand. One brother responded to pressure by becoming more attached to the structure. The other responded by trying to get out from under it. But once that divide exists, marriage changes everything. Because when William married Catherine, she entered the system carefully, gradually, and with years of preparation. The public watched her learn the rules. The palace had time to absorb her. The press had time to build a familiar story around her. She became part of William's future as king, and therefore part of the institution's long-term stability. When Harry married Meghan, the emotional energy was completely different. Their relationship moved fast, felt modern, and carried the promise of change. Meghan was American, divorced, biracial, famous in her own right, and not raised inside the codes of aristocratic Britain. To many people, that made her exciting. To others, it made her disruptive before she had even done anything. And this is where the first visible crack appears. The 2018 wedding should have been the beginning of a new chapter. For the public, it looked like a glamorous royal moment. Windsor, the carriage, the choir, the image of a monarchy becoming more open, more global, more emotionally alive. But behind that image, the stories that emerged were tense, personal, and strangely intimate. The most famous one was about the bridesmaids' dresses. At first, the public story suggested Meghan had made Catherine cry before the wedding. Later, in the Oprah interview, Meghan gave a different version. She said it was Catherine who had made her cry, and that Catherine later apologized and brought flowers. The point is not to relitigate a dress fitting. The point is that this was the first time the public was invited to see the two households not as one happy family, but as rival emotional camps. Think about how small the surface issue was. Children's dresses, wedding stress, a private disagreement between two women under pressure. In an ordinary family, that might become an awkward memory, something people talk around at Christmas. But in this family, it became a symbol. It became a press narrative. It became evidence, depending on which side you believed, that someone had been cruel, or difficult, or protected, or sacrificed. And for Harry, that mattered. Because he did not just see press stories as background noise, he saw them as danger. The press was tied, in his mind, to the loss of his mother, to the harassment of women he loved, and to the sense that the palace could choose when to defend someone and when to let a story run. For William, the same situation may have looked very different. He knew the press could be brutal, but he also knew the royal system survived by not reacting to every story. It survived through restraint, hierarchy, and the long game. From his perspective, constant public correction could damage the institution more than the original rumor. So, already, before Megxit, before Oprah, before Spare, the brothers were not just disagreeing about Meghan and Catherine, they were disagreeing about reality itself. Harry saw a failure to protect. William likely saw the painful discipline of public life. And once that is the argument, there is no easy solution. Because if Harry says, "You did not defend us," and William says, "This is how the institution works," both may believe they are telling the truth. But the emotional meaning of those truths is completely different. That is why the wedding drama matters, not because of the dresses, not because of who cried. It matters because it introduced the central question that would keep returning in different forms. When Harry felt attacked, would the family protect him and Meghan as people, or protect the monarchy as an institution? And the answer to that question would become explosive in January 2020. Megxit is often described as the moment Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties. But emotionally, it was much more than a career change. It was a declaration that the arrangement no longer worked. It was Harry saying, in effect, that the life he had been born into was no longer survivable for his family. The announcement came in January 2020, when the Duke and Duchess of Sussex said they intended to step back as senior working members of the royal family and work toward financial independence. To many outside observers, it sounded like a modern compromise. Fewer royal duties, more privacy, a life split between Britain and North America. But inside the royal family, this was not a normal resignation. The monarchy is built on coordination. Timing matters. Language matters. Permission matters. The idea that Harry and Meghan could announce a new role before the family had fully agreed to the terms was seen by many as a shock. And for William, it reportedly landed not just as a constitutional headache, but as a personal betrayal. To understand why, you have to look at the brotherhood from William's side. William was not simply watching his younger brother leave a job. He was watching the one person who had shared his childhood, his grief, and his public burden walk away from the structure that William could never leave. Harry could say the system was damaging him. William could not simply say the same and move to California. His future was tied to the crown. That does not mean William had no sympathy for Harry. But sympathy and loyalty are not the same thing. From William's perspective, Harry's departure may have felt like desertion at the exact moment the family needed unity. Queen Elizabeth was aging, Prince Philip's health was declining, Charles was moving closer to the throne. The institution was entering a delicate period, and instead of standing beside William, Harry was stepping out. For Harry, the same moment likely felt like survival. He had watched Meghan struggle, he had fought with the press. He had become convinced that the same forces that destroyed his mother's peace were now circling his wife. From that emotional position, leaving was not betrayal, it was protection. It was the act of a husband and father refusing to let history repeat itself. This is the terrible symmetry of the conflict. The same act can be interpreted as courage by one brother and abandonment by the other. That is why Megxit was a point of no return. Not because no family has ever recovered from distance. Families recover from distance all the time, but because Megxit forced the brothers into opposing moral positions. Harry's story required him to believe that leaving was necessary because the system had failed him. William's position required him to believe that staying was necessary because the system mattered more than individual frustration. Once those positions hardened, reconciliation would require more than kindness. It would require one of them to admit that the other brother's version of duty, pain, and loyalty had legitimacy, and neither seemed ready to do that. The public still hoped for repair. People imagined private calls, family meetings, the Queen bringing everyone together, Charles acting as a bridge. But by then, the conflict had already moved from ordinary family tension into something much larger. It had become a battle over the meaning of royal life. And then came the interview that made the private rupture impossible to ignore. In March 2021, Harry and Meghan sat down with Oprah Winfrey. For viewers, it was a global television event. For the monarchy, it was a crisis. For William and Harry, it was something even more intimate. Family pain turned into public testimony. The interview included several explosive claims. Meghan spoke about her mental health and said she had not received the help she needed. The couple said there had been concern within the family about the possible skin tone of their future child. They discussed royal titles, security, press pressure, isolation, and the feeling that the institution had not protected them. For many viewers, the interview was a moment of clarity. Harry and Meghan were telling the world why they left. They sounded wounded, frustrated, and determined to be believed. For others, it felt like an attack on the royal family at a time when Prince Philip was very ill and the Queen was in the final phase of her reign. But for William, the most painful part may not have been any single allegation. It may have been the fact that the accusations were made in public at all. The royal family has many rules, but one of the deepest is that internal conflict stays internal. You do not explain. You do not complain. You absorb damage privately because the crown must remain above the mess of personal argument. Harry had decided that silence was part of the damage. William belonged to a world where silence was part of the duty. That is not a small disagreement. That is an entirely different moral code. After the interview, William made a rare public comment pushing back against one of the central allegations. But even that did not really create a conversation. It created positions. Harry and Meghan had spoken. The palace had responded. The public had chosen sides. And once the public chooses sides in a family conflict, the family loses control of the conflict. Suddenly, millions of people were not just watching Harry and William, they were arguing on their behalf. Every facial expression became evidence. Every seating arrangement became a message. Every absence became a snub. Every source quote became a weapon. This is one of the reasons the feud has lasted so long. It is no longer just held by the people inside it. It is held by audiences, commentators, publishers, producers, palace aides, friends, critics, and fans. A private reconciliation would have to survive a public ecosystem that profits from the idea that reconciliation is impossible. And then, in January 2023, Harry published Spare. If Oprah made the conflict public, Spare made it detailed. The title alone carried the wound. Harry was not only telling stories about family events, he was framing his entire life through the role he believed he had been assigned. The second son, the backup, the one who mattered differently. For readers sympathetic to him, the memoir was a raw account of grief, trauma, and the emotional cost of royal life. For critics, it was a breach of family privacy on a scale the monarchy had rarely seen. For William, the memoir cut very close to the bone. Harry described a physical confrontation with William. He wrote about tense conversations, private family dynamics, and moments involving Catherine. He gave the world a brother's eye view of William, not as the polished future king, but as an angry, flawed, complicated sibling. And that is where the damage becomes especially hard to repair. Public institutions can survive criticism. Families can survive arguments. But it is much harder for a future king to accept that his private life has been narrated by his brother to a global audience. Imagine the emotional reality of that. The person who knew you before the titles, before the protocol, before the public image, writes about you for millions of strangers. Even if he believes he is telling the truth, even if he believes the truth is necessary, you may experience it as exposure. Not disagreement, exposure. And for Harry, there is a mirror image. Imagine feeling that your whole life has been shaped by silence, hierarchy, and stories told about you by unnamed sources. Imagine believing that other people have already used your life for their own purposes. Then telling your story does not feel like betrayal, it feels like self-defense. That is the emotional trap. William may believe Harry violated trust. Harry may believe the family violated trust first. And if both men believe they are responding to the first wound, then neither one can easily become the person who apologizes. This is why so many discussions about the brothers become stuck on the question of who should say sorry. But in conflicts like this, sorry is not one word. It is a whole worldview. An apology from Harry might have to mean admitting that he went too far by revealing private details. An apology from William might have to mean admitting that Harry and Meghan were not protected in the way they should have been. Those are not small concessions. Those are identity-level concessions. For Harry, to take back too much could feel like betraying the very story that allowed him to leave. For William, to concede too much could feel like undermining the institution he is meant to inherit. That is why the conflict is so durable. It is not just emotional, it is structural. And yet, even after Oprah and Spare, the public kept looking for signs of hope. Because people do not want to believe that brothers who lost their mother so young could remain estranged forever. The death of Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022 seemed, for a brief moment, like it might change everything. Grief has a way of rearranging families. Old arguments can seem smaller beside a coffin. People who have not spoken can suddenly stand in the same room because the ritual demands it. And when Harry and William appeared together with Meghan and Catherine outside Windsor Castle after the Queen's death, the image was powerful. There they were again, the two brothers, the two couples, walking side by side in public, greeting mourners, surrounded by flowers and memories and the strange pressure of national grief. For many people, that was enough to restart the fantasy. Maybe the Queen's death would remind them of what mattered. Maybe loss would soften them. Maybe the family would close ranks. But standing together is not the same as healing. This is one of the most important distinctions in the entire story. The royal family is very good at choreography. It knows how to produce images of unity in moments of crisis. But an image can be emotionally meaningful and still not change the underlying relationship. The Windsor Walkabout showed that Harry and William could occupy the same public frame when history required it. It did not prove that they trusted each other. It did not prove that they had talked through the pain. It did not prove that the old bond had returned. In fact, the days around the Queen's death may have deepened some wounds. There were reports and counter-reports about travel, communication, invitations, uniforms, seating, and protocol. The details were often murky, but the atmosphere was unmistakable. Even in grief, the family appeared tense. And grief does not automatically create reconciliation. Sometimes grief makes old divisions sharper because everyone believes they are honoring the lost person in the right way. For William, honoring the Queen meant protecting the continuity of the crown. The institution had to move smoothly from Elizabeth to Charles. The public had to see stability. Personal disputes had to be contained. For Harry, honoring his grandmother could coexist with feeling excluded, managed, or kept at a distance. He could love the Queen and still feel alienated from the machinery around her. Again, the brothers were not only experiencing different emotions, they were operating inside different meanings. The same pattern continued at King Charles's coronation in May 2023. Harry attended, but Meghan stayed in California. He was present for the ceremony, but the visit was brief. There was no public sign of a major reconciliation with William. The images mattered, but they did not tell a story of repair. And that became a recurring rhythm. Harry would come to Britain, or there would be reports about possible contact, or there would be speculation that Charles might act as a bridge. Each time, the public would ask the same question: will this be the moment? Will the brothers meet? Will Catherine encourage peace? Will the children bring the family together? Will illness, age, or duty soften the anger? And each time, the answer seemed to be the same: not yet, maybe never.
Not because no one cared, but because caring is not enough.
One of the most revealing moments came in early 2024, after King Charles's cancer diagnosis became public. Harry flew to Britain and saw his father. The visit was brief, but symbolically important. It showed that the bond between father and son, however strained, still had a channel. There was still some kind of path, even if narrow, between Harry and Charles. But there was no comparable public sign of a meeting with William. That contrast matters. It suggests that the father-son relationship and the brother-brother relationship are not damaged in the same way. Charles can be hurt by Harry and still approach the situation as a father nearing the later chapters of his life. He may want peace for personal reasons, for family reasons, or for the stability of his reign. William's position is different. He is not only Harry's brother, he is the next king. He is the person who will inherit the consequences of whatever the family allows, forgives, or normalizes now. For him, reconciliation is not only emotional. It is also about precedent, trust, and the future shape of the monarchy. That may sound cold, but from William's point of view, it may feel responsible. If Harry can leave, criticize the institution publicly, reveal private details, and then return to warmth without clear boundaries, what does that mean for the crown? What does it mean for trust inside the family? What does it mean for private conversations going forward? And from Harry's point of view, those questions may sound like the same old problem. The institution thinking about itself before thinking about the people inside it. This is the loop they cannot escape. William may need boundaries before trust can return. Harry may need acknowledgement before trust can return. But William may see Harry's demand for acknowledgement as another public pressure campaign. And Harry may see William's demand for boundaries as another refusal to face the pain. So the bridge keeps appearing in the distance, and then disappearing when anyone gets close. Through 2024 and 2025, that pattern became almost predictable. Reports of possible peace talks would surface. Friends or sources would suggest that some members of the family wanted reconciliation. Commentators would point to the children, to Charles's health, to Catherine's own health challenges, to the emotional cost of long-term estrangement. And yet the brothers themselves remained publicly distant. That distance is important because over time, distance becomes its own relationship. At first, estrangement feels like a crisis. Everyone asks when it will end. The silence is dramatic because it is new. But after years pass, the silence becomes normal. People build routines around it. Families learn who gets invited, who does not, who speaks through whom, which topics are avoided, which holidays are separate, which messages are sent through staff, lawyers, or the press instead of directly. At that point, reconciliation is no longer just about healing the original wound. It is about dismantling the entire life that has grown around the wound. That may be where Harry and William are now. By 2026, every new development seems less like a surprising twist and more like another example of the same settled reality. Harry may travel to Britain. Meghan and the children may stay away, because security concerns remain unresolved. There may be reports of private contact with King Charles, or hopes for a meeting, or speculation about whether this visit could change the mood. But when it comes to William, the story returns to distance. Reports that William is not planning a personal meeting with Harry are not shocking anymore. That is the point. A few years ago, a refusal to meet would have felt like a dramatic escalation. Now it feels like the status quo. And status quo is a powerful phrase in a family conflict. It means the pain has found a stable shape. It means the people involved may not be happy, but they know how to live this way. It means the absence of reconciliation no longer requires explanation every day. This is why the latest chapter, whatever exact form it takes, should not be treated as the beginning of a new feud. It is better understood as the continuation of an old pattern. Harry approaches the family, or appears open to some contact, especially with his father. William keeps distance, or at least refuses to make reconciliation easy. The press frames it as a possible breakthrough or another snub. The public asks why they cannot just sit down and talk, and the deeper answer is that a conversation is not enough when the conflict is about trust, memory, loyalty, and the right to speak. There is another painful layer here, and it is the one that makes the story feel universal rather than merely royal. In many families, siblings carry different versions of childhood. One remembers being protected, the other remembers being overlooked. One remembers the parent as loving but limited, the other remembers the same parent as controlling, absent, or unfair. One thinks the family survived because people kept quiet. The other thinks the family broke because people kept quiet. Years later, those siblings can sit at the same table and realize they are not arguing about one event. They are arguing about the emotional history of the family itself. That is, Harry and William on a royal scale. The world wants them to reconcile because the world remembers them as boys. But they are not boys anymore. They are middle-aged men with wives, children, responsibilities, public identities, and separate futures. Their lives have moved in opposite directions for years. William's future is fixed in Britain. His destiny is public service inside the monarchy. His children are being raised within the line of succession. Every decision he makes is shadowed by the crown he will one day wear. Harry's life is in California. His children are being raised outside the daily reality of royal duty. His public work, media projects, legal battles, and charitable commitments are built around a different kind of independence. His identity now depends, at least partly, on having left. So what would reconciliation actually mean? Would it mean the brothers speak privately? That may be possible. Would it mean they appear together in public? Also possible, under the right circumstances. Would it mean Harry and Meghan are fully trusted again inside royal life? That is much harder. Would it mean William accepts Harry's public account of the past? Harder still. Would it mean Harry stops describing the institution as a source of harm? That would require him to surrender part of the story he has built his post-royal life around. This is why the phrase "never reconcile" is both too simple and emotionally accurate. Human beings can surprise us. Brothers can speak again. Families can soften with age, illness, children, or grief. It would be foolish to say that no private kindness will ever pass between Harry and William again. But if reconciliation means returning to the old closeness, the old public partnership, the old idea of two brothers united by shared grief and shared duty, then that may already be gone. Not because of one interview, not because of one book, not because of one argument in a cottage kitchen, but because the brothers now represent two incompatible answers to the same question. What do you do when the family you love is also the system that hurt you? William's answer is to stay, protect it, and reform only within the limits of duty. Harry's answer was to leave, speak, and try to build a life beyond its control. Those answers are not just different, they accuse each other. William's answer can make Harry look disloyal. Harry's answer can make William look trapped or complicit. And when your brother's life choices feel like a judgment on your own, reconciliation becomes much more difficult. This is why the emotional core of the story is not hatred, it is grief. There may still be love there. That is what makes it sad. If there were no love, the story would be simpler. But love does not automatically create trust. Love does not erase humiliation. Love does not make a future king forget what was published about him. Love does not make a younger brother forget feeling abandoned when he believed his wife was drowning. Families often discover this the hard way. You can love someone and still decide they are not safe for your private life. You can miss someone and still avoid the conversation. You can want peace and still refuse the terms on which peace is being offered. That may be the quiet truth behind the Harry and William story. It is not that reconciliation is impossible in the abstract. It is that each brother may be waiting for a version of reconciliation the other cannot accept. William may be waiting for discretion, accountability, and proof that private family life will remain private. Harry may be waiting for acknowledgement, apology, and proof that his pain will not be dismissed as disloyalty. Those two doors do not open from the same side. And as long as both men believe the other must move first, the distance can last indefinitely. This is also why the public's nostalgia can be misleading. People often say they want the old Harry and William back. But the old Harry and William belong to an earlier chapter, before marriage, before children, before the Sussexes' departure, before Oprah, before Spare, before the Queen's death, before years of public argument hardened every position. The old image was real in the sense that the brothers did share history, affection, and trauma, but it was incomplete. It did not show all the pressure underneath. It did not show how differently they understood their roles. It did not show the resentment that could grow when one brother was being prepared for the throne and the other was being prepared to support him, without ever sharing his central purpose. So when people ask why they cannot go back, the answer may be that there is no back to return to, there is only forward, and forward would require a new relationship, not the restoration of the old one. A new relationship would have to be smaller, more private, more bounded. It might not include public appearances or warm brotherly images. It might not satisfy royal watchers. It might not give the world the emotional closure it wants. It might simply mean occasional contact, respect at family events, and enough peace that the next generation does not inherit the full bitterness of the last one. That would be less dramatic than a grand reconciliation. But in real families, peace often looks less like a movie ending and more like a careful agreement not to keep reopening the wound. The question is whether Harry and William even want the same kind of peace. Harry has often seemed to want conversation, acknowledgement, and a chance to tell his side. William has often seemed to want silence, distance, and the protection of boundaries. Those instincts clash every time a new headline appears, and that is why the feud keeps regenerating. If Harry speaks, William may hear another breach of trust. If William stays silent, Harry may hear another rejection. If Harry visits Britain, people ask whether William will meet him. If William does not, the refusal becomes another wound. If Charles opens a door, people ask why William keeps his closed. If Meghan and the children do not come, the story becomes security, exile, and the next generation's distance from Britain. Every detail becomes part of the same emotional machine. And yet, beneath all of it, there are still two brothers who once shared a life no one else can truly enter. That is what keeps the story compelling. Not the glamour, not the palace intrigue, not even the scandals. It is the possibility that somewhere under the anger, there is still grief for the relationship they lost. If this story holds your attention, it is probably not only because it is royal. It is because it asks a question almost every family understands in some form. How many times can trust break before love is no longer enough to repair it? And maybe that is the question to leave in the comments, because it is the hardest one here. Is reconciliation still meaningful if it only happens after both people have stopped expecting closeness? Or is that not reconciliation at all, but just a ceasefire? In the end, Harry and William may never have the reunion the public imagines. They may never sit for a photograph that tells the world the brothers are back. They may never return to the easy warmth people remember from their youth. But the more important point is that they may have already accepted that. Not publicly, not dramatically, not in a statement, but through years of choices. Harry built a life outside the institution. William continued deeper into it. Harry told the world what he says it cost him. William stayed mostly silent and carried on toward the throne. Harry's visits became events to interpret. William's distance became an answer. And now, each new development is not a new beginning. It is another chapter in a story whose direction has been clear for a long time. Two brothers can survive the same childhood and still become strangers. They can lose the same mother and still disagree about what her memory demands of them. They can love the same father and still approach him through different doors. They can stand in the same cathedral, walk behind the same coffin, appear in the same family photographs, and still live in separate emotional countries. That is the tragedy of Harry and William. Not that they fought, not that they hurt each other, but that both may believe they are the one who was left behind. And if both brothers are waiting for the other to admit that, then the distance between them is not just miles or headlines or palace walls. It is a version of the past that neither one is ready to surrender. So when the next headline appears, when another visit is announced, when another source says a meeting might happen or definitely will not happen, it is worth remembering the bigger picture. The question is not whether one trip can fix the feud. The question is whether either brother can imagine a future where being right matters less than being brothers. And right now, after 8 years of accumulated ruptures, public revelations, private grief, and separate lives, that future still looks very far away.